Welcome back. Now, the end of apartheid was meant to herald equality for black South Africans. But after 13 years of democratic government, the distribution of wealth in South Africa is anything but equal. In fact, many of the country's most deprived communities are now worse off, as Owen Fay now explains.
It's over 30 years since these scenes were filmed. South African police opening fire on rioting black students in Soweto. At the heart of the protests, the fight against the apartheid regime. More than 500 were killed and thousands injured. But it took a lot more violence and time before that regime fell.
Africa!
And Nelson Mandela, hero of the impoverished black population, won the nation's first all-race elections. Apartheid was over. And yet, 13 years on, most of Mandela's supporters are still poor. The end of apartheid has brought little economic benefit to their lives. In fact, it's got worse. Real income has declined by approximately 40%. The gap between the rich and poor is one of the widest in the world. Truth is, new jobs exist. There are vacancies for more than 5,000 in the construction sector alone. But few poor black South Africans make the grade. They just don't have the education or the skills.
Well, let's rejoin our guests now. In Cape Town is Sandra Botha, the parliamentary leader of the opposition Democratic Alliance Party. In Johannesburg is Christa van Rensburg from the Federation of Unions of South Africa. And from London, James Lord. He's an Africa economic analyst. Sandra Botha, let me come to you there in Cape Town. I mean, how wide is the gap between rich and poor in South Africa now?
Well, it is still considerable. I don't think it's the biggest in the world anymore, but it is considerable. But I don't think that it's this gap that is giving rise to what is happening now why we have the strike, but also why we have protests in many municipalities. It is the fact that people were promised basic living standards. They were promised schooling, they were promised housing, and they were promised health care. And the government is failing, I'm afraid, in delivery for various reasons, and amongst them that where there are skills, they are often not, they're not employed in the right place, and that people without skills are employed. So the poor are suffering on account of policies the government have put in place in terms of employment, and it certainly needs to review that, also the skills that it will bring from abroad. We have got great trouble with our Home Affairs and difficulty in getting in skills. And I think also in terms of the training that we've put in place, we've got SETAs, sectoral training agencies, that have just not delivered the kind of quality workers that we need to do the jobs, to deliver to the poor. If we can manage that, we will be improving the lives of the poor. The government, I think, will have less of this kind of industrial action on its hands.
I want to put that very same point to Christa van Rensburg in Johannesburg. I mean, what happened to the promises of black empowerment for many of those disenfranchised? I mean, have these promises been broken?
Darren, I wouldn't say so. I think the main problem we sit with here is a problem of long-term strategic planning in terms of human resources in this sector. It seems as if the unions use this only chance they get in, let's say, 2 to 4 years, to bring all the dirty washing to the table. I think that if the government really applies its mind and looks at strengthening skills, looking at HR benefits, helping, assisting employees, we won't have this kind of scenario.
James Lord in London, how much has the ANC strayed away from its working class roots to a more sort of technocratic approach to the economy and business? I mean, are they now paying the price for that shift, do you think?
Certainly that's the perception, yeah. I mean, the ANC party is heavily divided, as everyone knows. I mean, I would say that there is an emerging black middle class in South Africa, as everyone knows, and that is a very good thing. But the perception is that this black middle class has emerged via sort of political connections, and there are lots of allegations of cronyism and corruption with the ANC, which is part of the reason why we see such industrial action. But again, the focus, as the other speakers have been mentioning, needs to be on the supply side of service provisions rather than raising wages as a way to solve the problems. And really, going forward for the next few years, there needs to be a very longer term sort of strategic plan on behalf of the government to increase skills. Massive investments in education is needed. Major investments within social services are also needed to avoid this sort of action happening again in the future.
I mean, this issue of the ANC is actually an interesting one. I'm going to put that to Sandra Botha in Cape Town, because there are already whispers within the ranks of the ANC, Sandra Botha, that there's going to be a big change in leadership, perhaps to someone who's more in tune with the masses and the poor working class communities. Is that how you in the opposition see it?
I don't know if you're referring to a more populist kind of candidate to become the president. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, absolutely.
That would be what we would be needing? I don't think so. I think that's one position. There are several candidates emerging, and I can only think of one at the moment who would fit that image. But the government, I think, is not lost sight of its roots. It is the way in which it is governing which has not helped it to service the people, that the poor, which we must look at is not the number of people that are striking. What we're having is in some of the lower middle class striking, middle class. We also have to deal with, and the government has to deal with, a very large percentage of people who are unemployed, and that is really where the rub lies, I think.
Christa van Rensburg, obviously the big opportunity for South Africa is the Football World Cup in 2010. I mean, do you see the tournament providing real economic opportunities for many working class black people?
True, Darren, I do think so, although you must know that a lot of the jobs will be in construction, being casual of nature, but there are huge spin-offs, as we saw in Germany and France. So I'm sure we will benefit, and employment prospects will also benefit from the World Cup.
I want to put that point as well to James Lord in London, because obviously South Africa is now gearing up for the 2010 World Cup, but that's not been without controversy, hasn't it? I mean, how will ordinary South Africans benefit from what is a sort of global showpiece tournament?
Well, the theory goes that with all the global media coverage, and if the government can showcase itself as an investment destination via the World Cup and all the attention that it gains from that, then you'll see greater economic growth. You'll see greater foreign investment coming in, good job opportunities within all sorts of sectors, primarily tourism sector, services sector, construction, as the other speakers have already mentioned, and. I mean, the key really has to be on the government strategy here to market itself properly. And I must say, there is controversy with the current Zimbabwe situation as well, and there are concerns, and a few people have even suggested that the World Cup may not even take place. So the government really needs to deal with this image abroad as an appropriate investment destination.
James Lord, I wanted to ask you about the regional picture, because South Africa is often described as the regional powerhouse of Southern Africa. How will these strikes, if they get bigger, if they increase, how will that impact on the regional economy, do you think?
Well, the rest of the economy in the region is beginning to stand on its own 2 feet. For sure, South Africa is absolutely crucial, of crucial importance for inter-regional trade and growth generally. But I mean, if you look at the Southern Africa region, Angola is growing at a very, very rapid rate at the moment. Botswana is what has for a long time been one of seen a very sustained level of economic growth. The East Africa community is very structurally a much more sounder place now, and economic activity domestically is becoming less dependent on South Africa. So. But that isn't to say that the impact would be negligible. I mean, certainly if you start to see inflation picking up at a much greater rate, then trade within the region could likely start to slow down.
All right, well, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. James Lord in London, Sandra Botha in Cape Town, and Christa van Rensburg in Johannesburg. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us on the programme. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. That's insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.